Thanks everyone for joining. I'm looking forward to this presentation. My name is Bennett Whitehouse. I'm from Scott Insurance. I work in our risk performance group. I sort of head up our risk management advising portion of the team, where we work with clients directly to help them manage their cybersecurity and prevent attacks from happening, as well as anything related to their renewals coming up on their cyber liability insurance. So I'll be one of our panelists today, along with Tom McKenzie. Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Bennett. I appreciate it. My name is Tom McKenzie, and I serve as the co-lead for TCDI on data privacy and security compliance. That's kind of a mouthful. Let me explain a little bit about what that means. TCDI has a couple of different avenues of looking at the world. We have, or I have a couple of avenues of looking at our world. I have the internal responsibilities of making sure that our data is secure. And that is typically the data that we bring in-house and we're hosting for our e-discovery and litigation type of clients. The external facing job that I have is working with clients on cybersecurity, performing assessments, acting as a resource for them on policy development, on process development, around cybersecurity controls so that our clients are keeping their data safe. So those are the two hats that I wear within TCDI.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Not a complicated job at all, is it?
No, not at all. It's a busy job though.
Well, part of why we're here today is really just to have a conversation about where our two jobs intersect, kind of from two different industries, and the interplay between cybersecurity and cyber risk management and cyber risk financing, aka insurance. So in the cyber risk world, you can't necessarily transfer your organization's cyber risk with insurance. Oftentimes, insurance is called, risk transfer. But insurance doesn't really stop your ability to be attacked. It's really a financing the damages from an attack. If you don't have a cyber liability insurance policy, you're still insured. It's just self-insurance. But insurance is an important piece of the program, but it doesn't prevent the damage from the attack, and it only pays for the cleanup. And all the talk in my world over the last year and a half related to the huge increase in frequency and cost of cyber attacks, really across all industries, is the rising cost of cyber liability insurance. And, quote, what controls do we need to have in place, first, to qualify to buy insurance, and second, to minimize our premium? The reality is, in the cyber insurance market, premiums are rising rather quickly. Even for companies with best-in-class insurance, they can expect a 10 to 30% increase, but we've had plenty of clients go well beyond that to 50% increase or double their premium. And that's on top of an ecosystem where insurance carriers are not turning a profit on this insurance. So not only are they raising premiums, but they're also increasing the requirements for defenses and controls that insureds need to have in place to manage their risk, much like they would do in other insurance lines, but they're just kind of catching up on the cyber side. And that's a lot of where you guys at TCDI play, is assessing cyber risk, helping our organizations build defenses. So a lot of the insurance conversation is really to the exclusion of the more important conversation that you and I would like to have with organizations, which is, how do we keep our employees, our customers, and our partners safe in the digital world, and keep our organizations running and avoid a major financial and reputational loss? So if an organization can assess their cyber risk exposure and put the appropriate defenses in place to manage their cyber risk and protect all the stakeholders involved, the insurance piece will kind of solve itself. And I know you've been deeply involved in cyber risk assessments and compliance and a lot of the liability side of cyber risk. So clients really see the application and renewal process during they get a lot of questioning during the insurance renewal process that has a lot to do with what you and I both speak with clients on a regular day-to-day basis in terms of what defenses do you have in place. Here's maybe where you'll be vulnerable. Here's the possible repercussions of an attack. And in many ways, the cyber liability insurance application is a little bit of a mini risk assessment in that it will ask a lot of the questions that we may ask an organization, but not nearly go to the same level. And it's kind of a black and white process. So I think, it'd be really helpful for the audience. I think we've got a mixture of both IT professionals as well as maybe finance professionals and business managers to maybe just talk about some risk mitigation strategies and tactics that the audience will see in their insurance application process and in their next renewal. And maybe we can demystify some of those things and talk about why they're important, both from an insurance perspective and a risk management perspective. Does that sound good? Right on.
Good to me.
So I think, maybe this is something that I can cover really quickly, and that is, sort of the first thing on our list is really, I'm coming up on my cyber insurance renewal, cyber liability insurance renewal. I get the sheet with all these questions. Where do I start? How do I stop? How do I start? What's the process? Well, my advice really is for the insurance buyer to partner up with their IT provider, whether that's in-house or third party, and start to look through and get to understand those questions and the spirit of the question, and answer it as honestly as you can, and run it through your insurance broker and see what they say based on, hey, we think the marketplace will look at this favorably, or if you can fix this up ahead of your renewal, then you're going to be able to be in a better position from an insurance perspective, a premium pressure perspective. Or they'll say, hey, I think you actually have this in place if they know you well, but I think maybe this question was a little misinterpreted. So just to kind of set the stage, I think that's a healthy process for any organization to go through, both internally and then with the folks that manage your cyber insurance. But Tom, a lot of the questions they're dealing with are related to some of the most common threats that organizations face from a cyber risk perspective. And from that end, can you talk about what are some of the most common threats that you see?
Yeah, that well, of course, is pretty deep. So I'm not going to get into everything, but I'll talk about a few of probably the most common ones that we see or that impact clients that we work with. And I don't know how technical this audience is. I know we've got a real mix of some technical people and non-technical people. So I'll try and keep the geek level at a real low level and apologize to the more technically inclined. But they'll understand where I'm coming from. First of all, one of the biggest threats that we see is just malware threats, and there's a lot of different types of malware that companies are dealing with, but they all are designed to do one or more of just a few things. They can deny access to critical components on a network. They can obtain information, steal information, if you will, steal data that is in storage areas in a network, and they can disrupt systems or even render systems just totally inoperable. So that's typically what malware is designed. Probably one of the more common malware types that people talk about nowadays is ransomware. And you can get into an entire discussion, an hour-long discussion of ransomware and everything surrounding that. But so malware is one of the biggest threats that we see. Another threat is just phishing or other social engineering attacks. And quite frankly, that's where a lot of the malware is being delivered, is through phishing attacks. The phishing attacks are kind of designed to do, again, one of maybe three things: deliver a malware payload to the user, to trick a user into giving up information or login credentials, which is real typical, or trick users into taking some other unhealthy type of action. You get into the realm of CEO fraud and that type of thing. They're just trying to trick users into doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. So that's what the phishing or other social engineering attacks are doing. There are man-in-the-middle types of attacks, and to be very basic on that, this is where an attacker is able to intercept a two-party sort of data transmission, and they do that with the intent of either stealing information or manipulating data in that pathway. And then you've got password attacks, which are real prominent. Again, a lot of those are coming through social engineering, where we just give them the password, with all they got to do is ask, we give it to them.
Yeah.
Or there are brute force attacks that still can be conducted. Dictionary attacks, brute force attacks are really just attacks where they apply a device that is running password possibilities through the system as fast as it can to try and hit on a good password. Dictionary attacks are kind of the same thing, but they're using dictionary terms. That's why we tell people don't use common dictionary terms in your password, because dictionary words are used a lot of times as an attack sort of vector. And I say don't use dictionary words. Certainly, if you've got a long passphrase, that might be an exception. But again, that's a whole different topic. And then there are zero-day exploits, which I think are a real critical threat out there. And that is basically where a new or unknown exploit is introduced. And there are new vulnerabilities that are introduced every day. And the ones that haven't been discovered and haven't, had a fix created for them or a patch developed for them are considered zero-day exploits, and those are very dangerous because they get by a lot of the defenses that are out there and in place. So there are 5 of some of the more common threats that I see.
Thanks. And Tom, you hit on something that insurance carriers have zeroed in on very deeply, and that is that a lot of these attacks, especially malware payloads, come through in phishing emails and through the email attack vector. And there's some statistics out there that would say that 90% of attacks have some element of a phishing email being involved in them.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the importance of training and phishing simulations and other email type defenses in preventing some of that entry, that front door entry for these attacks?
Yeah, you bet. I feel training in that area is critical. When you think about how we operate in email, I tend to, and I'm not unusual, I tend to live in my email, it seems. And this is an environment that has become so comfortable, and people are such at ease working within their email environment that they start to let their guard down. So good training on social engineering attacks and phishing attacks, what they are, what they look like, just training people to generally be suspicious of everything they see that they weren't expecting, and teaching people don't click on things. My God, don't click on things unless you're absolutely sure, because once you've clicked, it's behind you.
Yeah.
And so that's a real critical aspect of it. But when you're testing people, you also need to, or excuse me, when you're training people, you also need to test whether your training is getting any traction. TCDI does a great deal of training. And quite frankly, we provide a service where we train our clients as well. But testing needs to be an important part of that as well. Not because we're trying to catch somebody doing wrong, but we're trying to validate that the training that's been done is actually working, that people are changing behaviors. And you can see that change when you first implement a training and testing program and you map it over time. You can really see the change in behaviors. You will see people will click on links a lot less. Um, and at times it'll even go down to zero. But as smart as I think our people are, it's rare that we'll go through a testing period and nobody will click. It's just one of those things, and you just have to be vigilant with continuous training and remedial training if necessary. And it's a key component of staying safe for sure.
Absolutely. And the way that kind of manifests in the insurance process is on your insurance application, you'll see a question something like, do you conduct cyber risk awareness training or phishing awareness training or social engineering awareness training for your employees? If yes, does it include phishing simulations? And Tom, I think that's what you're alluding to, whereby an organization can send fake, well, they're real, but they're not, they don't result in attack, but fake phishing emails to their employees and register who clicked the link, who provided their username and password, can get a baseline error rate, provide remedial training for folks who are falling for those, and then create a greater level of awareness and understanding of, hey, how well do our employees understand this risk? How good are they at scrutinizing these things? And are we improving in that realm?
Yes, Bennett, thank you. That's good clarification. That's exactly the testing I'm talking about.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think I talked to one of y'all's, or one of TCDI's chief pen testers a while back. I think it was him that mentioned this. Maybe it was someone else, but he said they were working on phishing simulations and trying to find an entry into an organization. He deployed the nuclear option, which was a link for a free Chick-fil-A sandwich. You can see the failure rate go through the roof. So,
Oh my gosh.
classic, classic move.
Life is simple, isn't
Yes, yes.
it?
I think even some IT directors fell for that one. So,
Oh boy.
well, Tom, we're kind of talking about one that's a big human element to risk, but maybe pulling back a little bit higher level to how does say we're starting fresh, or we want to put a new set of eyes on this, or hey, we think we're good, but we want to approach this again. How does a company assess their risk and get a good idea of where they need to improve their defenses? What are some tips and tricks, or just a process that you'd recommend for folks on the line?
Yeah, but in some cases that may depend upon the company and the sophistication of the company and the resources that they have internally. However, I think the easiest, uh, probably the most straightforward way of doing that is engaging a third party in a cyber security risk assessment or security assessment. These assessments typically look at all areas of an entity's technical infrastructure, the processes that they have in place, the policies that they have in place, the practices in the various departments that they have in place, and it will measure them against certain cybersecurity standards that perhaps they need to be held to or that they just want to be held to. There are a lot of different models out there, security models, and these assessments typically are designed to be friendly to the different models that are out there. So that's probably the easiest, least expensive from a third-party engagement standpoint. The second would be audits and certifications. There are audits that can be done, and we do those as well, that are they're a little different than an assessment. We're asking a lot of the same questions, but we're digging deeper for the actual controls. We're not taking a company at their word. We're looking for the proof. And that's sort of the difference between an assessment and an audit. And then you've got certifications, ISO certifications, and other certifications that sometimes are industry specific, that companies can go through. Those get quite expensive, but in some cases they're just required.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that I've talked to clients about this is, establishing known vulnerabilities versus unknown vulnerabilities or unknown weaknesses. So I oftentimes, when I talk to clients, I say, hey, look, based on the knowledge that you have between your in-house IT team and or your third-party partners, go through and maybe do an asset inventory and look through a checklist of the defenses and things that you're doing on a regular basis and activities you perform, and self-determine if there's any areas of improvement first. And especially if they're big ones, maybe work on those. Also, maybe look at that insurance application. If there are any major things on there that you're not checking the box on that insurance carriers would like you to see, well, first of all, shoring up those holes can, in some cases, influence your cyber reliability insurance renewal, but also can represent a great area for you to improve significantly on just managing your cyber risk. And, I mean, that's anything from, Tom, you mentioned a lot of different frameworks to reference, like the NIST framework and maybe ISO. If your company does work for any DoD organizations, the DoD is coming out with their CMMC kind of audit process. And so there's so many different resources out there to reference and look at. And there's some processes that folks can do internally too, before even engaging a third party on those types of audits. But one thing that I say, I ask people, hey, establish your known weaknesses first and start working on those. But then most definitely go to the step that I think you were mentioning, and that is, hire a third-party cybersecurity firm that really knows what they're doing and knows the latest tactics, techniques, and procedures, and how attacks unfold from a start to finish point of view, and establish where your unknown weaknesses are that they can identify. So I think that risk assessment, that audit, but I would also throw in the mix penetration testing. I think that's a huge piece, and maybe you can talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of expand it to vulnerability testing as well. Penetration testing includes vulnerability testing, but it takes it a step or so further. Vulnerability testing is looking for known vulnerabilities within your environments. And and it's important for you to do that. It's important to have that knowledge. And then there are a couple of things that I know we'll get to that kind of stem from vulnerability testing. Penetration testing is something that is a little more a little deeper. Let me take one step back. Vulnerability testing, a lot of companies can do themselves. There are software out there that an IT department can run, or an information security group can run, that will identify vulnerabilities. It'll identify the level of criticality of vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. And then you should have a policy and a process that talks about how you take care of those vulnerabilities. How quickly you take care of vulnerabilities at different levels. So that's sort of the vulnerability assessment piece. Most companies don't really have the ability to do penetration testing because that requires some human expertise. Now some do, but in most cases, companies don't have the type of knowledge on staff that will be able to look at the vulnerabilities and begin to assess whether and how those vulnerabilities can be exploited. And that's what penetration testing is all about. It's finding the vulnerabilities and then finding exploitable vulnerabilities and showing that, you've got this vulnerability and I could have, we're not going to take a system down. We're not going to take a company down, but we're going to be able to show them that this is a vulnerability that was exploitable. It could have taken you down. And these are the consequences. So doing both of those things, I think, is pretty key. Um, and one, I think, follows the other.
Awesome. Yeah, so we'll talk about vulnerabilities a little bit more here in just a second, because I think there's another rabbit hole that we can go down with the audience on that one. But I do really want to tackle a big elephant in the room first: multi-factor authentication. Most insurance carriers at this point won't write an account if they don't have multi-factor authentication in a couple of very key areas. And I would argue that these are kind of the bare minimum at this point. But usually they're looking for multi-factor authentication on backups, any type of backup that can actually be protected by multi-factor authentication. Offline hard drives are a different story, and tape backups. But backups, remote access, so maybe logins for the VPN, things like that. Email accounts and privileged and IT accounts on the network domain. But that's really becoming the bare minimum for insurance. Some carriers take that even farther. Can you talk about why do we want every organization to use MFA? Why is it such a big deal? What does it do? Why is it important?
Well, yes. First of all, multi-factor authentication, or MFA, is probably going to give you your biggest bang for a cybersecurity buck. It's easy to deploy, and it's difficult for an attacker to get around. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's very difficult for an attacker to get around. So that's why we want it in place. We've all seen it in our lives. I mean, multi-factor authentication is becoming ubiquitous in our lives. I mean, pretty much everywhere you go for an online login, you have the capability, including your social media types of accounts, you have the ability to implement multi-factor authentication. And in essence, what it's doing is it's going a step beyond a username and a password. A username and a password used to be the standard. You got your username, you've got a password, hopefully it's a strong password, you put it in and you get access. Those things can be compromised. So what multi-factor authentication does is it puts a layer in there that is a real-time layer, meaning that I put my username and my password in, and the system sends to me either over my email or over my phone. And you can argue which one of those is more secure, but I typically have it come to my phone. And it is a code that is generated at that time. So it is a real-time code that's sent to only the person it's supposed to go to. And that person then puts that code in. And so you've got another layer of protection before you're able to access whatever environment you need to access. So it's, you'd mentioned putting it on all publicly facing access points, and I totally agree with that. And I think I understood you to say internally it should be on all administrative access points as well. A lot of companies do it only on internet facing types of access, but I would argue that access through the local area network, you want anybody that has administrative types of controls and abilities to have to use multi-factor authentication before they, as a part of their process of authenticating to that administrative level. That's just going to prevent people that have kind of weaseled their way into your network and now they're trying to gain, privilege, it's going to stop them from being able to get to the levels of privilege that you need to protect.
Right. And there's an example that a client that I work with has gone through where perfect example of that was attackers got a foothold in their system with a login and then managed to elevate themselves to a full system admin privileges. From there, they completely disabled all of their security alerts. They replaced all of their backup files with basically ghost files and rendered their ability to recover from a ransomware attack largely useless because they now had full system control with that system admin access where
Yeah, that's the keys to the kingdom right there.
exactly they could access all of the crown jewels. So multi-factor authentication puts in that second factor that's much harder for someone to crack from a remote position if they don't have your phone or if they don't have access to your email account to get that code or to receive that application push through an application like Duo or Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator.
Correct.
Yeah, so insurance companies kind of recognize that, hey, with the number of attacks that, if you have a phishing attack that involves credential compromise or compromised credentials that end up out there on the dark web or sold through some marketplace, that second factor is a huge defense against those compromised credentials leading to a major attack on your organization. So MFA is a really powerful solution, but it's also one that's becoming pretty much required for cyber insurance at this point.
Indeed.
So let's talk about patching again a little bit. I want to kind of frame this question a little bit. I talked to the chief penetration tester at TCDI last month about sort of publicly discoverable, easily exploited vulnerabilities, meaning specific vulnerabilities like unpatched software or hardware, or other a little bit more technical type vulnerabilities beyond just an unaware employee that gets socially engineered. But there are bad actors out there searching the internet for public facing endpoints like servers and laptops and others with these vulnerabilities. And that's sometimes how they decide to target an organization. Is they're not going for your organization specifically just because they decide they want to paint a target on your back, but because you have a vulnerability that they can exploit. And that's really, it's low-hanging fruit from an attacker's perspective, but it's also low-hanging fruit from a building defenses standpoint. And it also influences the loss control requirements from the insurance standpoint of, hey, these guys can go out there, scan IP addresses for domains, find vulnerabilities, and then decide to attack you from that. So, can you talk about patching a little bit? Like, what exactly is it? Who does it? And why should we be doing it on a regular basis?
You okay? Well, first of all, I mentioned earlier that new vulnerabilities are discovered every day. And that's just the way the world is. So these things are coming up every day, and patches are being developed for those vulnerabilities pretty much every day. For the non-technical folks, what a patch is it's a fix. It's a fix for the vulnerability. It's something that will be applied to the operating system code or the software code that will close the door of this particular vulnerability. So that's in essence what a patch is. The need to patch, I mean, when you understand that new vulnerabilities are discovered every day, when you understand that bad actors are searching for these vulnerabilities, and they have some fairly automated means of doing this. I mean, it's not like they're sitting there, typing in an IP and seeing, is that got the vulnerability? Nope. Okay, I'll go to the next one. This isn't a slow process. They've got automated ways that are searching for these vulnerabilities very fast. So you want to patch vulnerabilities as quickly as you can if they are critical vulnerabilities, if they are exploitable vulnerabilities, you want to patch them as quickly as you can. Having said that, you need to patch vulnerabilities as a part of a documented patch management process. You don't want to just begin, and these patches typically are provided to you by the manufacturers. You don't want to just, they send me a patch, I'm gonna put it, I'm going to apply it. There's a process involved in applying patches that includes assessing the patch, assessing the vulnerability, assessing the exploitability of the vulnerability. It's testing the patch in an environment where you can be sure that if you roll this out to your overall environment, it's not going to break things. So there is a process, there is and it should be documented, that will drive how vulnerability patching will be conducted, but they should not be ignored. It is a process that should be a regular process, and regular can mean different things for different companies depending upon the company, the vulnerabilities involved or the patches involved and that type of thing. But it should be a part of a regular process that is ongoing in an organization.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess maybe to put sort of an insurance perspective on this, the way this will kind of manifest is a couple of ways, but the big one is if you look at an insurance application, it will say something like, do you have the ability to apply critical and known patches to software and hardware on your system? And if so, how often or how quickly can you apply those patches? Meaning, should something like a zero-day exploit be discovered that is a major weakness that can lead to a ransomware attack or something, how quickly can you react and respond to that vulnerability discovery and then patch that vulnerability on your system? So insurance carriers pay attention to that.
And that should be a part of the patch management process or plan that I referred to. Depending upon the criticality of the vulnerability, you should have it documented. Critical patches are going to be applied in X number of hours or days, and high level, medium, so on and so forth. That should all be documented and known among the team that will be doing that work.
Absolutely. And to put a little bit of a real world example on it, just to tie a bow on the patching piece, is really there were two major events last year that kind of woke up the insurance industry. And one was the SolarWinds Orion vulnerability and hack, and the other was a Microsoft Exchange Server vulnerability that was discovered and exploited by attackers. Both of which led to ransomware attacks in some cases, and were also critical vulnerabilities across tens of thousands of organizations, if not hundreds of thousands. Log4j happened earlier this year as well. It's a big piece of logging code involved in a lot of different applications, and insurance carriers very quickly recognized, oh my goodness, this leads to a big vulnerability in organizations. We've got to make sure that they have the ability to, when these zero-day exploits are discovered, that they can discover that, patch it, and remove that vulnerability from their system due to the extent of the consequences that can recur from not patching it. So without getting into the details of exactly what those vulnerabilities could do, that was a big wake-up call for a lot of folks. Was, oh man, these affect thousands of organizations very quickly and can have severe consequences for each of them. So it's something for IT administrators and cybersecurity professionals that are defending a particular organization to look out for and be ready to pivot around fixing. But similar to patching, something else that comes up on insurance applications, but is also can create a similar type of vulnerability, is end of life or end of support software or hardware. Meaning Windows, for example, machines that run Windows 7 operating software stopped receiving security support from Microsoft back in 2020, if I recall correctly. Meaning that operating system no longer gets security patches when vulnerabilities are discovered. The same can be said for Windows Server 2008 and plenty of other older tech out there that eventually the market moves beyond. So can you talk a little bit about when and why organizations should upgrade their technology?
Yeah, I don't know that there is any one right or wrong answer to this. So I want to preface it by that, and when a when a when hardware or software reaches its end of life, what that means is it's no longer going to be supported. And you just stated that, Bennett. It's no longer going to be supported. They're no longer going to provide patches and updates and fixes and that type of thing. It's pretty much you're on your own with that. What you got, you got. So if there's a new vulnerability that is discovered in that software or that system, it's not going to get fixed. What it doesn't mean is that when the end of life date comes, that system or software will stop working. It'll keep working. You can continue to use it for a long time. Now, I don't recommend that because it's no longer supported. It's no longer being patched. And I hope with that last discussion, it's understood that that's a really important thing to be doing in your technology environments. So the basic point is it's no longer being supported. It's not being patched. So how do you manage that? Well, if you don't know what you have in your environments, there's no way for you to manage that. And that's where an asset inventory of both software and hardware, operating systems, all of these types of things come into play. So you have a source of truth of what you have in your environments and where it is in its life cycle. You will know whether it is still being supported or when the end of life date is scheduled to happen. With that information, there needs to be a phase out and phase in process. This stuff a lot of times you can't just flip a switch and all of a sudden, the old stuff's out and the new stuff's in. This takes a lot of planning. You have to make sure how new systems are they going to play nicely with the other stuff you've got in your environments. You have to have time to be able to test these things in a test environment that mimics your production environment as closely as possible. So in essence, this is a part of a strategic plan. There are budgetary considerations involved here too. Your CFO doesn't want to hear you come to them tomorrow and let them know that you've got $100,000 expense that's going to need to be put into place over the next 30 days. That's not a discussion anybody wants to have with the CFO.
Right.
So this needs to be something that is planned well enough out where as you're entering a planning cycle year, you know what you're going to be upgrading this year. You know the costs associated with it. You know the process that's going to be applied to phasing out and phasing in this new piece in your architecture, and that you also give yourself time for ample testing, as I mentioned. So those are some of the considerations that I think you need to have when you're looking at end of life types of remediation.
Yeah, Tom, it's a great way to kind of sum it up. That kind of reminded me when you started talking about taking that asset inventory and just knowing what you have.
Mhm.
That's a big element of risk assessment. It
Absolutely.
ties us right back to point number one of, hey, knowing your risk and knowing it ahead of time and planning for that. And you make a great point. Some of these upgrades that um, may or may not need to happen now, or at least need to happen sometime in the near future or the next year, they're not as simple as, upgrading a server is not as simple as buying a new box and plugging it in. There's lots of information that flows through and out of that thing, and as you mentioned, when it comes to patching, sometimes when you patch something, it breaks how something else works on the system, and it's it's a pretty complicated process, but very important function of the business in managing their risk, and something insurance carriers are paying attention to. Um, Knowing that if an organization has a critical vulnerability in their technology that they need to upgrade, if they're not making other mitigating steps to segment that technology and protect it like the crown jewels is a concern for sure. So we're coming up, we're 45 minutes in, but I know that this is a really important topic, both from a risk management standpoint, from an insurance standpoint. I know it's something you've worked on pretty intimately as well. I want to talk about incident response, and I almost want to leave it open ended and say, hey, Tom, what does the audience need to know about incident response? I know we could spend an entire hour on that. But maybe if you give us the 5 to 10 minute version, that would be really good. Because I think, no organization can be perfectly secure. No matter what, if someone has a target on your back and they're a skilled hacker, eventually maybe they can find a way in to cause some damage. And even if not, if there's a scare, we want to have a plan and be able to mitigate that damage and manage a potential attack and thus a potential insurance claim to the best possible outcome. So, what's the short version? What's Tom's elevator pitch on incident response and planning for that?
Well, yeah, how many floors is this elevator going to? Um, yeah, it can be a real deep topic, and but I think there are a few things that people need to keep in mind when we're talking about incident response or disaster recovery plans as well. Um, First of all, when an incident happens, things get really chaotic and things start moving really, really fast. That is not the time to be thinking, how are we going to respond to this incident? So that's just sort of the primary premise. You want to do all of this thinking and planning ahead of time so that when the worst case scenario happens, all you do is you start going through your plan. And it's not that you won't deviate from the plan. You probably will, because not all incidents are created equal. They're not all alike, but at least you have a plan that you don't have to make up as you go. That's not the position you want to be in. So let's start with that. The business value of having an incident response plan is pretty straightforward. First of all, it's going to reduce the impact on your business operations overall. It'll reduce the cost of responding because you're going to be responding in a more efficient, planned out manner. And you will have done the homework ahead of time in terms of the third party resources that you might need. You will have worked with people like your insurance company, because quite frankly, your insurance company may have some requirements on who you use for certain aspects of your incident response. And you
It
need
most
to know
certainly will.
that if that is indeed the case. Um, Another business value is that it'll minimize regulatory fallout. And what I mean by that is nowadays it's almost expected that companies are going to have to deal with incidents, and the regulators understand that as well. So in some respects, the regulators are looking at how you respond to your incident, and and the way they're going to look at you and assess or Fines could be different if fines are going to be made. Fines could be different if you actually manage your response to an incident in a well organized and orchestrated fashion. And then the final point on that, I'd say, would be it's going to minimize PR damage. You know, Bennett, you mentioned earlier that insurance is intended to really pay for the responding of an incident and that type of thing. But what insurance doesn't pay for is the hit you can take from a PR standpoint. And nowadays, even the public is becoming more charitable with companies that have incidents because they're just so widely seen. But the public is really watching how a corporation responds or a company responds to their incident. And you can enhance your PR by just managing the incident really well. You can't manage an incident well unless you've got a well-documented and executed incident response plan. So that's my business value soapbox. Now, in terms of pre-planning for your incident response, I'm not going to get into what a plan has and how you develop it and all that kind of stuff, because that truly is a whole nother session.
That's a full hour.
Yeah, that's a full hour. But
Maybe three.
there is kind of a checklist that I like to give people in terms of preparing for your planning. So this is pre-planning checklists. The first thing is what are your company's capabilities? And you have to ask yourself, what are our IT capabilities? Do we have a lot of IT expertise internally, or are we outsourcing all of that? Do we have cybersecurity capabilities on staff, or do we outsource that? Or is that a third party that's a part of our plan? You need to know what your company's capabilities are before you start making that plan. Most companies don't have forensic capabilities, for instance, and I think I mentioned that already. Some might, but most don't. And that's typically something that's going to be needed in many severe incidents. What data do you have and where is it? This is a data, what is called a data map. It's understanding the type of data that you have and where you have it. You just can't assume that the data is, well, this data is over here on that server. Users will do the darndest thing with your data. They will put data in the darndest places, and you need to know that. You need to know where the data is, especially personal data, because that's what's going to get you into regulatory type of hot water, is when you start losing personal data. So that's on the checklist. Another one is, what are your regulatory and contractual requirements? Different industries are dictated by different regulatory requirements. All companies have contracts with clients or providers. What do your contractual requirements say? You need to have an understanding of what those are and what they mean from an incident response standpoint. What third parties do you use? And that's not just third parties. What third parties would you use for incident response? But what third parties are you using in the supply chain? What are the third parties that are upstream? And what are the third parties that are downstream of you? So having a good understanding of where your business fits in that whole stream is an important aspect before you start putting together an incident response plan. And then what are your current controls and safeguards? Just understanding what your current state is from a controls and safeguards perspective is a real important thing to know as you go into planning for incident response. And then you want to determine what is an appropriate IR plan or incident response plan model. What one best fits you? And there are a couple of different models. The basic model is you will handle everything yourself. You have a lot of technical and other resources on board, and you can handle all of it. The other side of that coin is you don't have any of those resources, and you have to use a third party that will actually implement, plan and implement for incidents. And then you might be somewhere in the middle where it's sort of a hybrid, where you do have some expertise on board. You can do certain things, but if PR communications need to be done, you need to outsource that, or other aspects of the analysis of an incident, you need to outsource that. So you just need to kind of look at what model really of an incident response plan would be right for you. So I think if you went through that checklist, that would get you at a really good starting point for the development of an incident response plan.
That's awesome. And a couple of things as you were talking ran through my mind that I think are just a quick add to that I'd love to mention. And one is a potential damage assessment. When you start going through that, when you think about that planning process, thinking about business critical operations and business critical resources that could potentially go down during an attack, and what the cost associated might be depending on how long those are down. I think one of the stats I saw out there was the average downtime for a ransomware attack is 19 days. And if you think about how much of our business operations are done digitally, you can start to think about how to pivot in terms of what we can do while those things are down, and what's the cost of that going to be, either to communication with customers or et cetera. So understanding how an attack could affect you can help you back into part of that checklist you were talking about. I think two other pieces specifically related to insurance that are really, really important that I harp on all the time with clients and colleagues is understand if you have cyber liability insurance policy and you want to use it on a claim for an attack, know those claim reporting procedures and know to report that claim early. That way, it can be referenced as notice only, and you think, hey, we can handle this, but they'll at least have a hotline or something to determine whether they triage that claim and say, hey, we want to bring in third-party resources or not. We think this might be more serious than it is. And the other piece is just understanding, as you mentioned, Tom, the third-party piece. There's lots of different people out there that can help with a claim, from breach coaches and data privacy attorneys and forensics and ransom negotiators, and you got to communicate with law enforcement and maybe with the public. So you're talking PR and legal. A lot of that is often provided by the insurance carrier and paid for by the insurance carrier. But if they want to pay for it, oftentimes you're locked into using their panel. So clients kind of get in trouble sometimes, not necessarily in trouble, but they end up with out-of-pocket expenses that oftentimes they wouldn't necessarily have, because they hired their own firm, found out they're not on the panel, and they have a negotiation process to go through while they're already going through responding to the attack. So just a little tidbit for the audience there from the insurance perspective of, hey, if you want this to be paid out by the insurance carrier, just know that they have some procedures they require of you that you might want to include in your incident response plan as well.
Good points.
Well, I know we're coming up on the hour, so I kind of just want to close with a quick conclusion in that, we just talked about 7 of the most crucial things to understand, to have in place to both make your organization significantly more secure, as well as easier to qualify for cyber liability insurance. And that is, hey, look, understanding how to fill out that insurance application from a starter and understand the language and speak it, and make it part of your organization's overall risk management strategy, including cyber risk in that. 2 is just understanding the common threats and how they apply to your business. 3 is understanding, how do you assess your risk and get a good idea of where you can improve to match your defenses to the common threats that are out there today. 4 is managing MFA. It's the big elephant in the room from an insurance perspective, but it's a really strong defense. Number 5 is just understanding how vulnerabilities play out in the real world and of cyber risk, and why it's important to patch those, as well as Number 6, with end of life and end of support technology. And then lastly, making a concerted effort to prepare to respond for an incident. I can't stress that enough, in that these things are chaotic. They involve a lot more people in your organization and outside your organization than you might expect if you've never been through this before. And having a plan and working that plan as things go wrong are so critical to quickly, calmly, and effectively responding to an incident. So those are my closing thoughts. Tom, anything else you wanted to close out with for the audience?
Nope, I think you've summed it up well.
Awesome. Well, I know we had a couple of questions on backups and MFA and some specifics there, and I just wanted to address those very briefly for the folks on the call. My advice there is, especially if you're dealing with a cyber liability insurance carrier, ask them directly, or your broker, what specific requirements for the policies you're trying to get are needed, and go from there. I can speak in generalities, but for your specific case, I'd recommend going that route. I think that's all I have for today. I want to thank everyone that joined the webinar today. And Tom, thank you for all your wisdom and knowledge that you shared with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, take care, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.